subject is worth more than a passing answer. Because beneath that little tongue tingle is something larger and more useful than a trick of fruit. There is a whole chain of understanding in it. Now I want to put this to you plainly right at the start. I was not raised where pineapples grow. This is no home orchard fruit of mine. Pineapple belongs to warm lands, tropical places, hot air and rich light, and it is not the sort of thing most people in cooler farming country ever think of as familiar in the old sense. So I come to this, not as one who grew up among pineapple fields, but as a curious person who noticed the sensation, heard the common explanation, and then went looking for the real one. And what matters to me here is not just the answer itself, but the way the answer unfolds, because it tells us something about food, about the body, and about the practical wisdom people have carried for generations simply by paying close attention to what the earth does. So today, I want to tell you the real reason pineapple seems to eat you back, what is truly happening when your tongue starts to prickle, why it is not actually a threat to you, and the simple ways people have learned to tame that bite entirely. And more than that, I want to show you why this tiny oddity belongs to a much older and much deeper truth in the kitchen, one that careful cooks have understood for a very long time, even when they did not use scientific language to say it. Before we get into the heart of it, let me say just this much. If you enjoy these plain explanations of the hidden behavior of food, then you already know the sort of thing we do here. We take an everyday mystery and open it up until it makes sense. Now, let us get to the center of this one. Deep inside fresh, raw pineapple there is a substance with a name, though the name itself matters less than the work it does. The name is bromelain. You need not remember it if names are not your concern. What matters is that bromelain is what scientists call an enzyme. And that word, too, sounds grander than it really is. The plain meaning is simple enough. An enzyme is a natural substance that helps break things apart. It takes larger things and cuts them down into smaller ones. And this particular enzyme has a special preference. The thing it goes after is protein. Now that may still sound a little distant until you take one more step with it. Protein is not some abstract laboratory matter. Protein is what flesh is made of. A piece of meat is full of protein. The soft tissues in the body are built with protein. And here is the part that makes the whole thing click into place. The inside of your mouth, your tongue, your cheeks, that tender lining in there, all of that is made of living tissue rich in protein. So when fresh pineapple juice spreads over the tongue and along the inside of the mouth, bromelain does what bromelain always does. It begins working on protein, and the nearest protein at hand is the very surface of your own mouth. That is the real reason pineapple seems to eat you back. It is not a figure of speech only. On a very small and gentle scale, the fruit is beginning to break down the surface proteins in the tender tissue of your mouth. That roughness you notice, that little sting, that scraped feeling some people describe, is the sensation of the fruit working on you while you are working on it. That is why the feeling is so peculiar. It is not simply a flavor. It is not just sharpness. It is not only sourness. It is a tiny, active interaction between the fruit and your flesh. A strange truth for something so sweet. And if that sounds a little unsettling, I understand. It ought to. Any honest explanation of it will sound more alarming at first than the experience itself ever really is. But do not run ahead to the wrong conclusion. The fact that it is doing something to the surface of your mouth does not mean it is doing serious harm. There is a great distance between a small natural effect and actual danger. Still, before I explain why you are perfectly safe, it helps to see just how real this protein-breaking power truly is, because otherwise it all sounds like a fancy little story that somebody made bigger than it is. Long before modern science isolated this enzyme and named it, people who lived where pineapple naturally belonged already knew what the fruit could do. They may not have had the word bromelain, and they surely did not need it. They had something better in many ways, which was direct experience. Indigenous peoples in the regions of Central and South America, where pineapple grew in its own proper climate, observed long ago that the plant and its juice had a flesh-softening power. They learned that tough meat could be made tender through contact with pineapple. They learned it because they watched what happened. They learned it because people who live close to food and land often notice truths long before anyone writes them in a book. And I think that matters. Because one of the worst habits in modern talk is acting as if knowledge only becomes real after a laboratory gives it a formal name. That is not how human understanding has ever truly worked. People discover by living, by cooking, by preserving, by handling food day after day, season after season, generation after generation. They notice what toughens, what softens, what spoils, what sweetens, what stings, what settles, what heals, what turns harshness into nourishment. So when we say pineapple contains a protein-breaking enzyme, that is one true way of saying it. But when older peoples understood that pineapple could soften meat and change the character of flesh, that too was true understanding. It was practical truth, and it deserves real respect. Now let me give you something even more vivid, because this is where many people begin to see that the power in the fruit is not imaginary and not exaggerated. In pineapple canneries, where workers used to spend long hours cutting and handling fresh fruit, the juice was in constant contact with their hands. Not for a bite or two, mind you, but hour after hour, day after day. And over time, something remarkable was observed. The skin on their fingertips, especially the delicate ridged surface that forms fingerprints, could be worn down by all that repeated exposure. In effect, the fruit's protein-breaking action slowly smoothed those prints away for a time. Now that sounds almost too strange to be true, but it makes perfect sense once you understand what the fruit is doing. And just as important, it also shows the limit of the danger. Those fingerprints did not vanish forever. Once the exposure stopped, or once the workers protected their hands, the ridges returned. No permanent ruin, no horror story, just a very plain demonstration that this fruit really does have a flesh-softening power strong enough to be noticed when exposure is constant and prolonged. If it can do that to hands over time, then certainly it can make the mouth feel a little rough after a few slices. And that brings us to the question that ought to rise in any sensible mind right about now. If pineapple is truly working on the proteins in the mouth, and if its juice can affect the skin with enough exposure, then why on earth is it considered safe? Why are people not harmed by it every time they eat it? Why does this not turn into some serious injury the moment the fruit begins its work? That is the right question, and the answer is reassuring, sensible, and rather elegant. It comes in two parts. The first part is your own body. The tissues inside the mouth are not weak in the way people often imagine. They are delicate in feeling, yes, but they are also quick to renew. The lining of the mouth repairs itself rapidly. Surface cells are shed and replaced with astonishing speed. So when fresh pineapple roughens that outermost layer just a little, your body is already well equipped to set matters right again almost at once. What the fruit affects is shallow and temporary. The sensation may be noticeable, but the effect is fleeting. By the time a person has gone on with the rest of the day, the body is already mending what little disturbance was made. The second part of the answer is even simpler. Pineapple does not remain in your mouth forever. You chew it, you swallow it, and down it goes into the stomach. And once it reaches the stomach, the conditions there are nothing like the conditions in your mouth. The stomach is built to break food down. It is full of strong acids and digestive forces whose entire purpose is to dismantle what you eat. That means the very substance in pineapple that was nipping at your tongue is itself broken down once it reaches the stomach. In other words, the thing that was doing the nibbling gets stopped dead by the much stronger machinery of your own digestion. So there is no deep danger waiting farther down. The fruit's active bite belongs mainly to that brief contact with the tender surface of the mouth. After that, your body takes over completely. Your mouth heals fast. Your stomach shuts the whole business down. Between those two facts, you hold every advantage. The pineapple may have a little power, but you have the stronger system by far. That is why the experience can feel odd without being unsafe. It is a temporary little skirmish, and your body wins it easily every time. Now, before I go on to the practical part, which is how to stop the tingle if you dislike it, let me pause on one thing that matters more than people sometimes realize. Many common food myths endure because they are almost true in feeling while being wrong in cause. Pineapple does taste bright. It does feel sharp. So people blame the acid. That is a reasonable first guess. But a reasonable first guess is not always the truth. And one of the most useful habits a person can have, in the kitchen and in life, is learning to ask one question farther. Not just, what does this feel like? But what is actually causing the feeling? The whole world opens up when you begin to ask that second question. So let us answer the next one. Suppose you enjoy pineapple, but would rather not have your mouth feel the least bit scraped or prickled afterward. Is there any way to stop it? Yes, there are simple ways, and the first one is the most important because it reaches beyond this fruit into one of the oldest truths of cooking. If you do not want pineapple to bite back, cook it, heat it, and the problem changes altogether. Why? Because heat changes the enzyme. Bromelain depends on its structure in order to work. Once enough heat is applied, that structure is altered. The enzyme is undone. It can no longer do its particular job. It no longer breaks down protein the way it did when the fruit was raw. That is why cooked pineapple is so much gentler than fresh pineapple. It is the same fruit in one sense, but not in another. Its sweetness may remain. Its flavor may remain. But that active little flesh-softening force is no longer what it was. And here, to my mind, is the richest lesson in the whole matter. Heat changes the nature of a food. Not just its warmth, not just its softness, not just its taste, but often its behavior. This is old kitchen truth. It is not trendy, it is not new, it is as old as the cook fire. A raw thing and a cooked thing are not merely the same thing at different temperatures. Very often they are functionally different foods. Heat can tame, transform, soften, stabilize, thicken, sweeten, or disable. It can turn something active into something quiet. It can make a harsh thing gentle. It can make a risky thing safe. It can make a stubborn thing digestible. Good cooks have known this in practice for ages, whether or not they ever spoke of enzymes or structures or chemistry. Think of an egg, loose and fluid in its raw state, turned firm and set by heat into something entirely different in texture and behavior. Think of milk behaving one way cold and another after scalding. Think of tough ingredients becoming tender after time over fire. Think of all the foods that are not simply warmed by cooking, but changed in character by it. Pineapple belongs to that larger family of truths. Raw, it has a little bite in it. Cooked, that bite is gone. Not because the fruit has been disguised, but because heat has altered the very thing that caused the trouble. This is also why canned pineapple generally does not give you that same mouth tingle at all. The canning process involves heat, and that heat has already done its work long before the fruit reaches your table. So when a person says, "Funny, the fresh stuff stings my mouth, but the canned kind never does," there is your answer. Same fruit, different condition, different behavior. Heat made the difference. Now, there is a second way people have long used to tame pineapple, and I find this one particularly satisfying because it belongs to the same old tradition of practical food wisdom. In parts of Southeast Asia, where pineapple is well known and handled with familiarity, people have sometimes soaked the cut fruit in lightly salted water before eating it. That simple treatment helps blunt the effect of the enzyme. The salt alters things just enough to reduce that biting action, so the fruit becomes gentler on the mouth. And what I like about that is not only that it works, but that it reminds us once again how often ordinary people discover useful truths simply by living closely with their food. They cut it, taste it, prepare it, notice the patterns, pass the method along, and before long, what began as observation becomes household knowledge. That is real intelligence. Not the sort that needs to show off, but the sort that proves itself by usefulness. A little salt water, a short soak, and the fruit is often much easier on the tongue. So, if fresh pineapple bothers you, you have your two plain solutions. You can cook it and let heat undo the enzyme's power. Or you can soak it in lightly salted water and soften the bite before you eat it. Either way, the fruit becomes easier company. And if the tingle never bothered you much in the first place, then at least now you know what it is. You do not have to sit there thinking it is just acid or just some random quirk. You know the real reason. And let me say this too, because it is only fair to the fruit. Pineapple is not your enemy. It is not some malicious thing hiding in sweetness with bad intentions. It is simply a fruit that comes carrying a natural substance that breaks down protein. That same strange power that can make your tongue feel a little raw is also the reason pineapple has been useful as a natural meat tenderizer. So the quality that surprises you at the table is the very quality that made the fruit valuable in another setting. That is often how nature works. A thing can seem troublesome in one moment and useful in another, depending on how it is handled. There is something almost funny in that, if you think on it. One of the sweetest and most inviting fruits on the plate carries inside it a tiny little bite of its own. It looks cheerful, it smells pleasant, it tastes like sunshine to most people, and yet hidden inside all that sweetness is a substance that says, in effect, I do not go down without doing a little work of my own. That contrast is part of what makes the story memorable. A harsh plant would not surprise us by being harsh, but a sweet fruit with a secret bite, that stays in the mind. So let me gather the matter plainly. If you have ever eaten fresh pineapple and felt that odd tingling afterward, the real reason is not simply acid. The fruit contains bromelain, an enzyme that breaks down protein. The tissues inside your mouth are rich in protein, so while the juice is in contact with your tongue and cheeks, the fruit begins working on that tender surface. That is why it can feel rough, stinging, or scraped. Not because something has gone terribly wrong, but because something very specific is happening for a short time. And if you wondered how such a fruit could possibly be safe, now you have that answer too. Your mouth renews itself quickly, so the tiny effect is temporary. And the moment the fruit passes into your stomach, the enzyme meets a far stronger digestive environment that stops its action. So there is no lasting danger in it for a healthy person eating ordinary amounts. Just a curious interaction at the doorway of digestion, nothing more. And if you prefer not to feel it at all, there are your practical answers. Heat changes the enzyme and takes away the bite. That is why cooked or canned pineapple is so much easier on the mouth. A soak in lightly salted water can also help tame the effect. Two simple methods, both born out of careful observation, both reminding us that how a food is handled changes what that food does. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt that pineapple tingle and blamed the acid the way most people do? Or did you already know there was something else at work in it? And I am curious about this as well. Have any of you ever used fresh pineapple or pineapple juice to tenderize a tough cut of meat? If so, I would be glad to hear how you used it and what result you got, because these old practical uses often teach as much as any formal explanation. And if you come from a place where pineapple is more familiar than it ever was in my own world, I would be glad to hear the ways your people have handled it, softened it, cooked it, or made use of its strange little power. Because in the end, that is really what this channel is about. The ordinary world is full of things people half notice and half dismiss. A fruit tingles the mouth, milk turns sour, dough rises, meat tenderizes, butter changes, leaves wilt, fruit darkens. Most people see the effect and go no farther. But if you stop and ask what is truly happening, the everyday world becomes deeper, older, and much more interesting. You begin to see not just food, but hidden behavior. Not just ingredients, but processes. Not just meals, but the quiet wisdom generations of people gathered by watching closely. And once you begin seeing food that way, you cannot entirely go back to seeing it as dead matter on a plate. It becomes lively again. It becomes a world of transformations. Heat changes one thing, salt changes another, time changes another, fermentation changes another. What seems spoiled may become valuable. What seems gentle may hold force. What seems simple may contain a whole little science tucked inside it. Pineapple is just one more example of that. A sweet fruit carrying a secret power plain enough for anyone to understand once it has been set out clearly. So the next time you bite into fresh pineapple and feel that curious roughness rise on your tongue, you will know the truth of it. It is not merely sharp flavor. It is not only acid. It is the enzyme in the fruit working on the proteins in the tender surface of your mouth. The very same flesh-softening power that people long ago learned to use for tenderizing meat. The very same power that heat can quietly undo and salt water can help tame. Strange at first hearing, perhaps, but harmless in the end, and more than that, useful to understand. And next time, since today we have been talking about a fruit that acts on flesh in a way most people never expect, I want to stay in that same family of hidden food behavior and talk about another thing many people have seen without fully understanding it. Why certain fruits darken almost as soon as they are cut, and why a little acid can slow that change while heat can stop other changes altogether. It is the same kind of story in one sense. An ordinary thing hiding a deeper explanation. Subscribe if that sort of plain unraveling of everyday mysteries is what you enjoy. Until then, remember this. When pineapple seems to eat you back, it is not your imagination, and it is not just sourness. It is a real natural process, small enough to be safe, strange enough to be memorable, and useful enough to teach a larger lesson. The fruit does have a bite in it, but your body is stronger, your kitchen is wiser, and the old truths still hold. Handle the fruit one way, and it nips at the tongue. Handle it another, and it grows gentle. And tucked inside that little fact is one more reminder that the common things of life are often far more wonderful than they first appear.